Hi, my name is Doug Golick, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today, we'll be talking about evaluating learning in web-based programming. What kind of web-based programming will we be talking about today? Things like social media, such as Twitter and Facebook, online learning, such as learning management systems or websites, and content sites, such as YouTube. Well, what to evaluate? I think the way to start evaluating any program is by looking at the learning objectives. Learning objectives help you to articulate the knowledge and skills you want learners to acquire. Learning objectives are always learner centered. I have a couple of examples here of learning objectives. As a result of taking the online course, participants will be able to compare the pros and cons of neonectinoid seed coatings. That's what they'll be able to do as a result of your web-based programming. If you're new to writing learning objectives or have difficulty writing learning objectives, there's a great website at the bottom of the screen that's the Carnegie Mellon University website that'll help you write learning objectives and give you more information about the strategies of writing good learning objectives. Also, you can evaluate your learning outcomes. Learning outcomes focus on the product that the users will do as a result of participating in your program. As a result of reading a Facebook post, learners will use their knowledge of bird behavior and life history to build a birdhouse. Readers will bake a food item using substituted healthy ingredients as a result of the Facebook post. Those are the outcomes or products that users will build as a result of your web-based programming. Learning objectives and learning outcomes both are worthy of evaluating. There are different types of evaluations. We're going to talk about all of these today, things like assessments, surveys, interviews, and case studies. Assessments. There's three different types of assessments that we'll talk about today. One is needs assessments. A needs assessment addresses clientele's needs before you begin the programming. They're a way to upfront ask a few of your participants what they want to learn or what they want to get from the program or what program to build, and use that information gathered from a needs assessment to help you build your program. There's also formative assessments, which are done during the program. They help you to assess as you go. You can evaluate your program and then change direction based on what kind of information you get from a formative assessment. Often formative assessments are short and done through quizzes or surveys to help you evaluate your program. There's also summative assessments, which most of us are familiar with, which assesses learning at the end of the program. These are often done through surveys, tests, projects or products, or through case studies or interviews, which we'll talk about here shortly. Surveys are a great way to assess your program. They're great for evaluating programs from the perspective of a participant. They're great for evaluating attitudes or actions as a result of your program that the user will do. These can be done as far as surveys are concerned as formative, needs, or summative assessments. They're often, if you ask an open-ended question as part of your survey, a great way to get at unanticipated outcomes as a result of your program. They're easily tabulated to tell a story. So it's one of the advantages of a survey is often surveys can be done on a 1 to 5 scale or a Likert scale, and you can tabulate or categorize responses and give a quantitative value to those responses for evaluation. You can also target a large number of people with surveys and get a large number of feedback from a large number of participants to help tell the story of your survey. One of the disadvantages of a survey is it's only as good as an interpretation of your questions, meaning you have to rely on users to read your question and understand what it means. And usually you don't get deep information from the users. So writing survey questions is a bit of an art. We won't cover that today, but I'll point you to some resources at the end of this presentation that will help you better write surveys. Interviews are another great way to evaluate programs. They're great for evaluating programs from a deep perspective of an individual participant or a group of participants. They're often information rich, meaning you get a lot of information from the interviewee about the program, about the impact of the program on their life. It's also in the context of the learner or the participant, which means they give you a perspective about how it impacted their life from their point of view. Often you're given artifacts during interviews. These are hard copy items or things, documents, that show the impact of a program on the person. These can be things like financial bills. These can be crop yields. These can be anything that you can think of that might be additional artifacts to document the impact of a program. The disadvantage of interviews are they are expensive both in time and money. And you have to think of how you're going to summarize or code the information for interpretation. Coding simply is when you have grouping like number of responses by category into themes. This takes a bit of a practice to do and time to do it in an effective way. But you get a nice result from this as a way to present your results in a way that can be used, interpreted by other people that are not familiar with your program. Case studies are another way to evaluate your program. Case studies are often done in a summative form that follows one or a few participants through their use of your program. You can be selective, and really the trick is finding a successful story to tell. It tells a story about the impact of that program on one person's life. Like interviews, you can collect artifacts, and the disadvantage of case studies like interviews is that they are expensive in both time and money to conduct, and needs to be written up for interpretation, meaning you have to write it up in a form usually in report form, that is easy for someone outside your program to understand or interpret. Like all tools, such as surveys, case studies, interviews, they do take some practice to do, and there's some learning involved in to do them effectively. One thing I would suggest is learning a survey tool. Learn how to use SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, or another program to actually write the survey. And also spend some time learning how to write good survey questions. There's a number of nice resources out there, and I'll share some with you at the end of this presentation about how to write an effective survey question. Now, coming back to our online programming, we talked a bit about how to write objectives and then how to evaluate those. One thing about online programming is you have this content up there, such as YouTube posts, Facebook, and Twitter feeds that you post, and they can be shared with people across the country or world. And once it's gone away from your queue and shared with someone else, you have no idea where that post is going. So one thing I always suggest is embed your evaluation or assessment with that content. So such as YouTube, you have an About section that you can embed a survey in. Same with Facebook posts or Twitter feeds. Put your survey or assessment solicitation within that post so it always travels with that post no matter how it's shared with someone else. That way you can gather and track impact as across the life of the post. One thing I also just suggest is providing incentives for taking your survey or participating in your assessment program. Give gift certificates or something as simple as a pen or a bookmark. That is an easy way to get people, or a large number of people, to participate in your survey. Now, what's a large number of people? Well, if you had 20% to 60% response, that's a large number of people responding to something like a survey. Other things like interviews or case studies, you're looking for 1 or 2 participants or a good representation of those participants to get the best assessment information you need. As with anything, if you're thinking about publishing your results or presenting on your results, you do want to get IRB approval. Now, whether you need approval or not ranges by university or by organization you're in, and they have different rules in each of those things. But make sure you're familiar with IRB or Institutional Review Board rules before you actually do your survey or assessment. Finally, to get good participation, ask up front for people to participate in your assessment. Notify participants of the time involved it will take for them to participate. Things like interviews and surveys may take less than 20 minutes for them to participate in. And just letting them know how long it'll take often will get people to respond. People are very reluctant to respond to surveys or even interviews if they don't have an idea of how long it's going to take of their time involved. Finally, here are some references to get you started in developing surveys and developing good questions to ask people during interviews. Some of these are free and up online. I hope you found this presentation to be useful in getting you started in assessing online content. If you do have questions about this presentation, please contact me at dgolick2@unl.edu. That's dgolick2@unl.edu.